Howdy, my name is Liam O'Mara, and I'm with Independent Democrats, and we're modeled as a group on the great success of Justice Democrats in advancing progressive candidates across the country. But while Justice Dems is focused on dumping corporate incumbents in deep blue seats, Independent Democrats wants to extend that into the purple and red seats so we can take that war of ideas directly back to the people. And today I'm speaking with David Peterson, who's running up in California's District 1 for Congress. So, how you doing, David?
Liam, good to see you. It's a pleasure to meet with you again. Huge fan of yours.
Thanks. Always great chatting with you. So let's dive right in and start with the basics here. In just a minute or two here, what's your elevator pitch? Who are you and why are you running for Congress?
I'm David Peterson. I'm running for Congress in California's first district. Hope to replace a very crooked incumbent, Doug LaMalfa. He's quite infamous in our neck of the woods for all of the horrible things that he does. He is exactly what everybody wants. Everybody wants to drain the swamp. And this guy takes a tremendous amount of bribes from the fossil fuel companies. He's got oil bribes. He gets money from pharmaceuticals. And all of that is the opposite of my platform, which is Medicare for all and the Green New Deal. And all of those folks that are paying him bribes, they don't want those things. They don't want Medicare for all and they don't want the Green New Deal. So right. He gets their bribes and that's about all he does. He is just, do nothing Congress member. That's it. He does take a significant amount of farm subsidies, and he has a lot of water rights that he resells, and he's known for distributing those agricultural subsidies throughout different entities to distribute the money throughout his family.
So in addition to taking the bribes from the big corporations, he's in essence trying to bribe his constituents by handing out cash that he's managed to get, rather than, say, advancing any particular agenda to help the people there, but just moving some cash around?
The agricultural subsidies, it's pigs at the trough, and the money goes to himself and his family. He gets so much that he had to expand it to his family. He needed to disperse it, and he did it very effectively.
And this is one of the worst things about a lot of our agricultural subsidies in general in the country, is that so much of it ends up going to people connected to the candidates, or directly to massive corporations that don't really need it anyway, and not to ordinary farmers. It's something a lot of people really don't understand about the system here. But we're still running we've got a top two system in California, so it's not quite like a primary, but it's a primary. But there are other Democrats running, so we want to see what differentiates you most from the other Democrats who might be running in your district.
I'm the progressive running in this district, which I am learning and from others who have run as progressives. Don't use that term too much around Sacramento. They take offense to it. So I'm learning. I'm slow to pick up on those type of things, but I'm working on it. My counterparts, the establishment Democrats have helicoptered in a candidate from outside the area, and he's got a whole bunch of money from the dam builders. So it's been a long time. If you're an old fossil like me, you remember the "Build It, Damn It" stickers that went around in our area for over a decade, late 80s and throughout the 90s. Everybody had the bumper sticker, "Build It, Damn It." So they're back at it. They want to build this dam and, end the habitat on the Bear River. And he's their supporter. And then he also wants they want him to raise the Shasta Dam so that it can hold more water, more capacity. So that's that candidate. And the other one is a veterinarian.
Okay, but so you mentioned progressive, which is an interesting one there. And again, it's a difficult label sometimes for people, and this is true of a lot of labels in this country. Just they pick up a particular association with voters, and that stops them from hearing what people are really standing for.
Sure.
So I want to get past the label just for a second here and get at some of the principle or the belief, because I've seen some of your platform, what you're setting for. I like what I see there, but I want to set aside the specifics and just see what is your vision for the country, about what are the challenges that you see us facing both as a country and in your specific district that you want to focus on.
It's a challenge nationwide to move away from the favors that Congress members grant to the donors that give them bribes. It's something that we all aspire to nationwide. It's a common ground and common denominator within our district. Both Republicans and Democrats will tell you, yes, we need to drain the swamp. They see the swampiest person on the Democratic side. The Republican voters see Nancy Pelosi. She is the largest fundraiser. She's infamous. She brings in a tremendous amount of money. And they would love to see someone hold her accountable and, question why she does what she does and who she's getting her bribes from. And that's something that our incumbent doesn't do. He doesn't ask her questions. He doesn't present the reality of why she makes the decisions she makes in Congress and why she grants favors to certain donors and not the rest of us. So, and then the same is absolutely true on the Democratic voter side. In our district, I'm thinking specifically, but I think it's true nationwide. I mean, I don't think there's anybody that's happy with the things that motivate the leadership in Washington, D.C. That's common denominator.
So at the end of the day, we can boil a lot of this down to an anti-corruption push, recognizing that politicians on both sides take massive amounts of money from special interests, from wealthy donors, from big corporations, and if you're taking in large donations from people, there is a string attached. Everyone wants to say, oh, there's no strings attached, but no one's writing you a $100,000 check if they're not interested in what you might do for them. I mean, if you get, and there are occasional Republicans who try to run on the same kind of drain the swamp, clean money pledges. Most do not, but occasionally they do. But they're still going to be ignored entirely by the leadership, outside of their own party. That we don't really deal with each other in that sense anymore. The politics has gotten extremely tribalistic in this country, so they do tend to tune the other side out. If we had a lot more independent-minded Democrats, then it would be a lot harder for the Democrats as a whole to pull off some of this.
Well, you say independent-minded, but what we need is voters that bridge that gap and look beyond that tribalism.
Exactly.
And voters take on for themselves as a priority and recognize that it is only the voters that can truly drain the swamp.
Right.
Only the voters can get that done. And if they look at their incumbent and they say, yeah, we know he's a crook, but he's our crook.
Right.
Then they haven't bridged that gap. They have to step up and say to themselves, I'm going to do the right thing. I'm not going to vote for the person that takes lots of bribes. Right. And it's a hard thing to do. It's a very, very hard thing to do. And that's the challenge. And we don't need everybody to do it. We never have to get to 100% of people to recognize it. We only have to get to 50%. That's it. Only 50% of the people have to recognize that.
Right. And if 90% of voters across party lines think that corruption is a significant problem, it makes sense to focus on the corruption there. And it is really a bipartisan issue. So getting in somebody who's going to be focused most on that really makes sense. So let's take that then into concrete proposals. If we're going to come in focused on this question of corruption and an independent-minded, fair person there, what would be some of the top legislative proposals you could push? Or maybe, I don't know, what's a top 3 things that you would actually propose that we do in Washington?
Follow the money. Where are the top bribes coming from? Where are the largest bribes coming from? Who's getting the biggest favors? Who holds patents which gives them the ability to price gouge all of their customers. There's no competition whatsoever because they hold a patent and no one else can produce the product. There's no free market. There's no free enterprise. It's a government imposed, federal government imposed monopoly. And we get to price gouge it. That's it. And I have clients in the industry. It's fantastic. Pharmaceuticals, you can charge whatever the hell you want, and nobody else can compete with you. And that's the law. Well, you know, Disney has a patent on Mickey Mouse, and, you know, they just renewed it. And if that patent went away, everybody would be selling Mickey Mouse t-shirts. And if the patent for insulin went away, everybody would be selling insulin. And the price would go down.
Right.
All we need is voters with the courage to vote against crooked incumbents that take pharmaceutical bribes. It's that easy.
Yeah, so I'm hearing that...
And it's entirely up to the voters. And the only thing that a candidate needs to do is tell the truth. If you have a candidate that steps forward and tells the truth, hey, the Democrats are taking bribes, the Republicans are taking bribes. I'll help you find it if you need help getting into the FEC database or Open Secrets or whoever else. And I won't lie to you. I won't deceive you. I won't pretend that one side or the other is not taking bribes. I won't mama bear the whole thing. I'll tell you the truth. They're taking bribes.
So we've got there then the commitment to honesty and getting this information out so that we know, you know, who's actually got it, and then a critique of intellectual property in a sense that can, you know, help to speed innovation and whatnot. So I can imagine then you proposing legislation addressing some of the intellectual property issues, maybe some of the corrupt issues where, I don't know, who thought it was a brilliant idea that people in Congress should be able to hold a ton of stock in areas that they're actually on a committee to regulate. I don't know, maybe we should address things like that as well. But beyond that, in terms of a proposal, do you have in mind particular ideals or a bill that you'd like to advance that would help the people both of the country and of the district?
Certainly. Lots of improvements that we could make. And I mean, Medicare for All and the Green New Deal are famous nationwide, and they confront the corruption. Some of the areas that are unique to me, I have no idea why, I'm the only one that recognize it, is in the energy industry, there is an opportunity to completely devastate the fossil fuel industry. And it's in residential solar, but it's illegal.
Right.
And nobody addresses the fact that even people that own solar, they were told you cannot install one more panel on your roof than what we're giving you. And if you do, PG&E is going to disconnect you. That's the law.
Right.
And people don't think, well, gee, I had to buy a brand new roof before I could put this solar on. That cost me $18,000. And now you're telling me I can only put solar on about 20% of my roof? And you can look at Google Earth, look at any Google map, any Apple map, all the solar installs around your neighborhood, they cover a small section of the rooftop, right. 20%. The reason is, that's the law. You can't compete against fracked gas. You can't compete against coal nationwide. Why? That's the law. Who makes the laws? The fossil fuel industry makes the laws.
Right.
So, yeah. How about that for a piece of legislation? Legalize residential solar, and it's illegal for just do away with all these restrictions. There is no more restriction from the utility company on how much solar you can put on the roof. Sure, there's still restriction from the building department. You can't put more on your roof than is structurally sound. You can't cover the chimney and the skylights and all the vents and stuff. That's perfectly legitimate. The building department should enforce those rules. But PG&E and the fossil fuel industry should not be able to force you to limit how much solar you put on the roof so that they don't have competition.
Right.
so that they can produce the electricity for your neighbor who runs the air conditioning all day long. They can produce the electricity in their fracked gas and fossil fuel power plants, and they can distribute it throughout your region and sell it to everybody.
Which
They
brings
can't
us back
handle
to
that. Can you
questions of
imagine if every single solar install that's already been done was 5 times bigger than it is now? That's going to hit the bottom line of PG&E.
right.
PG&E is not going to make their quarterly earnings. They're not going to make their revenue expectations if you allowed people to install these things and then adjust the pricing so that it's fair. I mean, right now the pricing is any electricity that you produce beyond what you use in a year, you get to sell it to PG&E at 4 cents. Why? It should be 10 cents, 15 cents, 20 cents. You can go buy an extension cord and run it over to the neighbor. That's $20, and you can sell your electricity to them.
Right. Which really gets
And you know
us
what
back
they're
to
paying over there?
kind of a
They
free
used
market.
to be paying 36 cents. Now they're up to 42 cents. It's ridiculous.
If you're able to generate electricity and sell it directly to your neighbors, it decentralizes and democratizes that power. It actually helps local free markets. It helps businesses. People could actually make money off of this and save money on the big utilities. But since the big utilities control the Congress and can set the laws in to favor them, it actually
and the state
harms
legislatures
the markets
as well.
Right, exactly.
So why do I have to buy an extension cord? Why can't I use the grid? It is a public grid. We paid for it. We built it. We installed it. It was our funding. The taxpayers paid up front, and the ratepayers pay over time, and the bondholders are doing the investment. The only thing that the utility company does is maintain it and gouge us and take all the money.
And they get to profit on that maintenance and using that infrastructure. Exactly.
And anything that they do wrong, anything that they screw up, they get to profit more. Let's say, for example, they blow up a neighborhood because they don't maintain the natural gas pipelines and people die and their homes burn down. Then the ratepayers have to pay more money, millions of dollars, for 5-6 years so that PG&E can run out ads to market themselves and present the fact that they believe that they are captured all of their overdue maintenance and they're doing a better job and we all love PG&E now. Why did we have to pay for that marketing? Why did we have to pay for all those ads so that they could brush up on their PR? And now in our neighborhood, they burned us out. It was PG&E's transformer that melted and fell to the ground and lit the neighborhood on fire. And there went the town of Paradise. And now we have to pay for it. So PG&E has to pay damages, but they don't pay damages. We still have to pay the executives. We still have to pay the marketing. We still have to pay the attorneys who make the laws that make it so that they make more money and the people pay.
They just pass it right on to us. We're actually the only country in the world that lets the pharmaceutical companies, for example, run advertising, and then of course that raises the cost. So we are literally paying for their ads. So yeah, it's a very similar issue, and it's a deeply corrupt and bipartisan problem there. Now that gets to an interesting question I want to ask, and something that I tend to ask every candidate that I can, looking at this, especially people who have ideas that actually have a broad support among people, the voters. I mean, anti-corruption, lots of us agree on. Increasing competition, allowing more individual freedoms to, put solar. That seems like it would be a very popular idea, right? But it'll be very difficult to get through a legislature, especially when so many people are bought and paid for by these companies. So the question then is, you're in Congress, right? So we've elected you and sent you there. What will you do to build consensus around these ideas so that Congress will actually serve the people again? How will you advance these kind of ideas in Washington?
I will be the first in Washington, D.C. to complete the legislative process. Today, the legislative process is you have a great idea, you write it down, and you throw it in the hopper. That's the nickname for the big box that accepts all of the bills, the legislation. And then it goes to committee and they chew it up. And then maybe the speaker looks at it and, thinks about whether or not she wants to bring it for a vote. And that's it. You submit your idea, you gather some co-sponsors, and they quit. All of them quit. They abandon it, whether it's Medicare for all, the Green New Deal, whatever. So the next standard step in the legislative process that's been going on for 200 years, it's called a Dear Colleague letter. Dear colleague, here's my bill, my legislation. Would you like to join us and become a co-sponsor? It's a 200-year-old process, and nobody's doing it. So I pledge to do that and do the next step. The next step is to share the response letters from all of your colleagues. So you share that letter and then everybody sees, oh, okay, so this is what my representative thinks. And every time you read one of these letters, they're hilarious. They're filled with just condescending platitudes, and they don't give rats, for their constituents, no matter what. Even if they made promises to support that legislation on the way in, I'm not co-sponsoring it, I'm not voting for it. You'll never get it through committee, not me.
So, yeah,
and
add some transparency to the
ticket.
process.
When you share that letter and people see that, the most significant call to action for constituents is when their very own representative that they voted for, they volunteered for, they've sent money to, and they've paraded their sign all over the place, whether it's on their front yard or their bumper sticker, and all of a sudden their representative says to them, no. Right. People don't like when their representative tells them no. So representatives are really careful about how they write those letters. They lean more on the condescending, and they just skip the word no and make up a lot of different excuses and platitudes of why they can't do any co-sponsoring around this legislation. Right. And they're full of excuses. They've got lots of them. So that next step is, once individuals have seen that the person that they got elected says no, then they have the opportunity to send a letter. Hey, will you co-sponsor this? And representatives send it back to you. And it's all on the official congressional letterhead. And it says no. And when you get your own official letter that says no, now you're really going to be mad. You're going to get everybody in your family to send a letter, and you're going to get all your neighbors and your friends. And the next step is you do a district office meeting. Only takes 6 to 18 people that have their letter, and you just make arrangements to go by and visit. And you get to talk to the field director, and you get to talk to the legislative director, and maybe your own representative comes onto the call for 2 seconds. They're usually listening in the background, and they try their best to talk you guys out of it. If you want legislation passed, that's all you got to do.
Right. Bring the people into it.
Right now, for example, Medicare for all, really popular. There's about 115 co-sponsors, and there is about 107 or so Democrats that have said no. If you get those letters and you do that district office meeting, you're going to pick up about 10 to 15% of them. One meeting with 6 to 18 people in their office, however many they let you squeeze in with COVID and all. You get in their office, you get in their face, and you say, hey, you promised this during the election. This is what we want. That's it. 10 to 15% of them will say, okay, I'll sign. For the next group that doesn't, you host a town hall. Nowadays, you could probably do your town hall on Zoom. You can invite tons of people to come to that. And I've done this, been there, done that. It's easy. Back in the day, you get a little venue, maybe your church, your local community center. You could do it in a park. And everybody that comes, some of them bring their letters, and it's a big event, right? A lot of people can come, up to 200. And you just pass around the microphone. And each person comes up and says, would you mind terribly co-sponsoring this bit of legislation that you, in fact, promised us you would deliver? And then you get people to tell stories about how it would affect their lives and why they want it. And when your representative sees 200 people standing in line to take the microphone and ask the same question, They're not going to let you get to the end. About 30 to 40% of the way through, they're going to recognize that these people came here to ask one question: co-sponsor this legislation.
Right.
I've done it.
Yep.
I framed my first no letter. It's in a frame, and I framed with it the yes letter. I mean, after we held the town hall, and I couldn't believe it, our representative said, all right, I'll co-sponsor it. I thought it was one more lie. I thought it was one more platitude. I didn't believe it. So I sent a letter again. Will you please co-sponsor? And of course, the staff heard, oh, it's been promised by the rep. So the letter says yes. My no letter, my yes letter, 3 months apart. What's the old adage? They say that a bunch of few dedicated people can never get something done, but wait a minute. In fact, that's the only ones that actually get something done.
Yeah, it's a
That's
Margaret
it.
Mead quote, I think.
Yeah. Margaret Mead. Those are the steps. All you have to do is guide people nationwide. I mean, right now, Medicare for all, these people are jumping through hoops to do a march. And not one single representative that said no to co-sponsoring is invited. They're not invited. They're not speakers. They're not involved. They have a process. They live in a bubble. And we can go to that bubble. It's in the Constitution. You can petition your representative. You're supposed to. That's the one thing that we fail to do in the United States. We vote, but we don't petition.
And we
don't do the official petition.
We absolutely
Every one of those petitions out there that's on a website that you sign, they're gathering emails so they can solicit donations from you. Mm-hmm. The only petition that's in the Constitution, and the only one that your representative pays attention to and counts, is the one that goes to their office, and it has to match your exact voter ID. It has to be your right address. You can't miss a digit in your address. You can't miss a digit in your zip code. Your name has to be spelled correctly. And a lot of them require to validate an email. Mm-hmm. If you get one thing off, your petition doesn't count. It goes into the garbage can. And most people don't realize that. And most people don't participate in the official petition of their Congress member, their representative. I mean, it's easier than attending a Zoom meeting. You just send a letter to them. And most of them, you do it right online at house.gov. Get your representative, and they have you send the email through the website instead of it coming from your own interface to your website. And when their reply comes, it comes right back to your email. If they send a hard copy letter, it goes to your exact address that's on your voter registration. Don't goof that up. People do. That's it. 6 to 18 people in each congressional district, 107 holdouts, could get 10 to 15% of them to join on as co-sponsors. And the next group, another 10 to 15%, they would have to move to the town hall. Guess what happens when you go from 120 to maybe 145 to maybe 165 and 75? You're hitting the limit. Now the next group's going to go, oh my God, everybody wants this, everybody's doing this, everybody's giving in, and they jump on. In Washington, D.C., the do-nothing Congress members jump on. Nobody wants to be number 220. Nobody wants to be 210. Nobody wants to be 205. Everybody wants to join the bandwagon before 200. So when co-sponsors get up to the limit and it goes 175, 185, 195, they all jump on board fast. Nobody wants to be 220. Nobody wants to be the last holdout. Only Christian Cinema and only Joe Manchin. They're the ones that, take the heat. Nobody else wants to take the heat. So if it's going to happen, that's how it happens. And then, they tell the president, we got to do this, because if we don't do this, those 200 people that showed up at that town hall, they're going to tell their family and their friends and everybody else that we said no. And guess what? If your Congress member says no to you on something that they promised during the previous campaign anyway, and you sent them money, you're probably not going to vote for them the next time around.
And this kind of basic town hall democracy, where we are able to interact with and push our representatives to do what we want them to do, is a bipartisan issue. It's something that we used to do a lot of in this country and have really moved away from. And I think part of it comes from people not really knowing what's involved or thinking it's too complicated or something. So somebody really kind of steering that process and helping the voters to see how they can do it, raising awareness of this power that we have as people that goes far beyond our initial votes.
People will drop a comment on Facebook or before they actually ask their representative to sponsor legislation. Right. People will actually waste their time at change.org rather than sending an official petition to their representative to become a co-sponsor.
Exactly.
We are distracted. We are diverted. Everything is designed to fool us, a lot of shiny objects. And yet, 6 to 18 people in so many congressional districts could that easily flip their representative and get them on board.
Exactly.
I've done a lot of this. What you're doing is you're elevating the issue from, oh yeah, a lot of people really want it, to you're stepping your way up to an election issue. The only issue that incumbents need to react on are election issues, which means if I don't do this, people aren't going to vote for me. And 9 times out of 10, when that happens, they have a challenger knocking at the door saying, I will do this for you. I will do this for you.
Right.
And that's when incumbents have to make their move. They either come on as co-sponsors or they resign because they know that their seat will flip. It's a really, really simple process, and there are a huge, huge number of establishment efforts to prevent people from doing that.
Right. So, and again, making that better known, kind of helping us in a little bit of civic awareness. This is something I've often lamented, the poor state of civics education in this country at all. The fact that people think that social media posts are somehow making a difference, or as you say, the change.org petitions, those get ignored. It doesn't matter. And it's the same with the people that are saying, well, I'm just not going to vote. Well, okay, then they're just going to ignore you. So what did you accomplish by that?
There
are specific things that we can do that will force accountability in Congress, and I think that the American people really want accountability. So someone who understands that system and can help steer it along, I think, would be a real benefit. Now, thinking in terms of the district and its sort of makeup, I want to get something pretty specific here. And this is something that I run into in chats with people all over the country. They tend to forget just how big California is, and that size leads to a lot of diversity in its demography and the basic landforms and what it needs. So, thinking about specifically the first, how do you see its specific needs in, I don't know, infrastructure, education, health? What are the things that you need in a largely rural district that are different from, say, Los Angeles or Orange counties?
We need healthcare. We need access to healthcare. We need hospitals. We need maternity wards. It's a long ways for most of us to drive down to Sacramento. So I'm in Grass Valley, Nevada City, and we have a new small hospital, Sierra Memorial, that has been built and developed just since I've been in this area, and it's a godsend. I mean, my grandparents, when they needed to rush to the hospital in a hurry, if Sierra Memorial wasn't there, they wouldn't have made it. There's no way they would have made it to Sacramento.
Rural healthcare is a huge problem in this country in general, and it's been difficult to attract the talent, physicians, nurses, whatever, and to build that kind of infrastructure in a lot of these areas.
Medicare for all would solve that problem in a hurry. So that's the thing about the rural areas in Congressional District 1 is they have grown. And they've grown a lot and they've grown fast, and the hospitals haven't kept up. And some clinics and previous medical facilities have been shut down. But if everyone had the funds to pay for health insurance and it was cheaper and we paid less, we each paid $2,000 a year instead of $8,000 a year, and we didn't have that crazy deductible of $7,000 a year. If voters were better at math and could do that math and figure out that they could save money, we'd be better off. Right now, a good number of Republican voters in our district want Medicare for all. And we're kind of unique in that regard because we've suffered so bad with a lack of health care in our area, because we've been so remote and rural, and we've grown lately. So we are a bit more purple blue in that regard on Medicare for all. So we support it, but there's still the tribal instinct that you talked about earlier. Now, if we called it Trump care instead of Medicare for all, done deal. And I'm willing to do that. I'm willing to take Bernie Sanders' legislation and write Trump care on the top and only call it Trump care from here on out. If that gets me elected, it's worthwhile. My opponent is vigorously against Medicare for all. Not my Republican incumbent. Well, my Republican incumbent is, but also the helicoptered in Democrat establishment candidate. Right. I mean, he came right out and said, no way, we can't have this legislation. It's just, too overbearing and forget about it. So he's not on board, which just devastated the constituents that inquired at our recent, county Democratic County Central Committee meeting. We've been, making the rounds. We only have 11 counties. It's not a lot of work to do. How many counties did you have in your race? One, you lucky dog, you lucky dog.
Yeah, that's what you get for.
I'm really hoping, and this goes out to the We Draw the Lines folks. Please, please, please make the land area of the districts about the same size. Get away from these teeny tiny ones like in the heart of Sacramento and in the heart of San Francisco. You've already split Sacramento County into 3 pieces. Split it into 3 big pieces. Let each of these areas have a lot of land. It's a good idea. And
making the districts more diverse in general would be a good idea, because you'd have to address different constituencies. This is one of the problems with gerrymandering in general, is that people are choosing their audiences so they can cut out certain issues. And one of the things
they started, I mean, Ellen Towser's district was the worst. I mean, that thing was a piece of spaghetti on the map that connected one military base to the Livermore National Labs, and then just meandered in between so that she could represent all of these government related employees, and that made it a safe district for her. So she drew the lines back in the day, let me tell you. So yeah, We Draw the Lines. Their first time was 2010 for 2012, right. And they did a good job. But yeah, they could do much, much better to not have these little teeny tiny districts. Make them all about the same size. And they know how to do this. I mean, you're splitting up land, you're splitting up people, 722,000 people in each district. We only get 52 this time. They can do it. They can make the land areas a lot more synonymous. So, and I mean, it would be a huge positive change. And I think it's a burden on those counties that get split. The counties that get split for a congressional district, if they have to carry that forward, that's a bit more of a burden on them, especially the rural counties. They're so small. I mean, 20,000 people, 10,000 people in a district, and you have to accommodate, 2 or 3 congressional districts. It's a bit of a nuisance. So I'm hoping that they get a break and a relief from that.
Yeah, and there is something really interesting about, a large rural area and questions like Medicare for All that I really like to see pushed, because it's not just the price points too, because you mentioned the savings, and there is a simple arithmetic problem here, but it also expands your freedom of choice in markets by taking away all the limited insurance markets there, the set networks you're in, and massively expands opportunity, because if everyone in that entire area has the same actual access to healthcare, the money is there to serve them, then the providers can move in and can offer those, and you can set that up better. Where right now there's, if the shareholders have to make X amount of money, it's a lot harder to convince people to invest in healthcare for rural districts. And the United States is actually the worst in the rich world in supporting rural areas for healthcare that way. So Medicare for All would be a nice one to try and push that way. But let's take that then into a general election. So, because you've got a couple of issues there that, well, they have baggage attached to them. Medicare for All, Green New Deal are associated with a particular branch of, the Democratic coalition that a lot of rural voters are being told constantly in the media to avoid. Heck, a lot of Democratic voters are hearing that stuff too, but they're being bombarded with a kind of false narrative around this. So the real question in terms of running for me is, say you're past this primary, you're running against a Republican, and now it's time to, let's flip this seat. What do you want to try and do differently to try and sway voters to say, hey, Medicare for All is for me, I'm going to take a chance on David? What are your crazy ideas for expanding our coalition?
Well, this part's not my crazy idea. Bill Clinton told us all this. Democrats like to fall in love with their candidate, and Republicans like to fall in line behind their candidate. That's absolutely true. And the only way to motivate a Republican voter to flip their vote or sustain from their vote is to outrage them. When they get mad, they will change their vote. And my favorite case in point, just recently, there was one instance where somebody just really wanted to get 11,780 votes. Could you please just find that for me? And the election officials have never done that type of Easter egg hunt before. It was new to them. They're all, they didn't tell them at the time, we've never found votes. The votes come to us through this official process, and then we just validate how they've managed the counting of them and yada, yada, yada. That's our responsibility. Finding, that's an Easter egg thing, right? It happens at the holidays. So there was a lot of, angst about that and anger about that and upset about that. And they really were outraged. And it came up. It came up from our president. It came up from individuals, and people said, well, that's it. We are not going to participate in the runoff election for 2 Senate seats. 2 Senate seats in one runoff election. Has this happened before in history? I don't know. But all of a sudden, there's a few people that didn't want to participate. And it kind of went back and forth, and they went back, out and begged the president to say, oh, tell everybody to come vote after all. And, he was, forced under duress to do so. But they weren't listening. By that time, they were off on their own, and they weren't turning out. And those that did turn out, they were going to cast a ballot with a few select words written on there, and they weren't going to fill in the bubble for those incumbents. And it, that combined with the huge voter registration effort that Stacey Abrams had been doing for 2 years, squeaked 2 wins and flipped the seats. So those are the type of things that motivate Republican voters. And what are the things that Republican voters are most upset about in our district? The number one thing is our incumbent representative embarrassed the president more than anybody else in the last 4 years. And it was horrendous what he did. He drug him all the way out to our district, set up a huge press release and photo opportunity, and had the president stand on our ashes, our burned homes. And then he let him say the name of the town wrong multiple times, stood right there next to him. It's the most embarrassing moment for the president in the last 4 years. And our representative put him up to it, let it happen, and didn't just, it's an embarrassment. And people are, I mean, can you imagine your family, your neighbors, your loved ones are gone. Your home is gone. And here's the president standing on the ashes, telling you to rake leaves. It's just outrageous. It's just horrendous. I mean, unless people were completely forced to move outside the district, people are going to remember that for a long time. And there's a significant amount of reconciliation that needs to be done. I mean, obviously an apology, obviously, shared remorse. But, it's all about turnout, right? So are you going to get folks to turn out for you after you pulled a stunt like that? That's going to be tough. And then, the signature issue that we talked about earlier, drain the swamp. Drain the swamp is a fantastic idea. And there is a huge movement on the progressive side of the Democratic Party. There's a huge organization called End Citizens United. Mm-hmm. Their goal is pretty much the same. They want the bribes to stop.
Right.
But they use different language and they use different words, and so they don't have common ground. So if you have a majority of people in your district that want to drain the swamp, and a majority of people in your district that want to end Citizens United, if you can bring those two groups together for common ground and get them to agree, hey, we all want to drain the swamp and end Citizens United, and you can call it whatever you want. You can call it whatever you want, but the goal is to stop the bribes. And the only way to stop the bribes is to stop the recipient getting the bribes. And the only way to stop the recipient getting the bribes is to vote against him. It's really simple and it's really straightforward. And that's the key to elections is you need to keep it simple. It needs to be really, really straightforward. There's a certain economic benefit for people. There has to be huge things on the horizon that people are going to see happening. And that's the other thing that's unique to our district. That we're on fire. We are on fire since 2017. We are burning up. Our homes are burning. The wildlands around us are burning. Our lives are in danger. We are at risk. And this year we feel it more than ever. It's hotter than ever. It's drier than ever. There's less moisture in the vegetation. There's more fuel. It's more volatile. We're more at risk. And we need somebody to take proactive action. We need new leadership that's actually going to show up and reduce the risk and reduce the fuels, and ideally do it in an environmentally sensitive way. A lot of people have these, capitalistic, exploitive ideas about how they're going to make a fortune doing it. But the most environmentally sensitive way to do it is release the goats. And numerous municipalities around many areas, from Fresno to can you see this? Does it go blurry on you?
Yeah, it's gone blurry because of the background.
How can I fix that? There he is. Hey. See the goat?
Yep.
So this is, local municipal fire. They've got sustainability plan in action. They've got the goats out on the hills, and they eat the vegetation and they immediately compost it and deposit it back. And historically, we do disking, plow the areas at risk and contain them and run around. But that's just down low. It doesn't get up as high as the goats, so it's not as good. And we've been doing prescribed burns, which, we have to do, but guess what? That ruins our air quality just as much as a wildfire. So it's better if we do this in a better managed way and we look towards mulching and composting and milling. For goodness sakes, there's so much lumber involved. And it's hard. I mean, I have a tremendous amount of wood myself, and I've got a local mill, and he's just sitting on it, and he doesn't want to deal with small logs. We need more facilities available to turn this into wood, because the advantage of turning it into cabinets and furniture and new construction and homes is you've carbon captured. for 100 years, 150 years, 200 years, however long your piece of art, your project lasts. And that's what we need to do. And we need to do more composting and mulching. We need to put that carbon back into the soil. And rather than dam more rivers, we need to open more rivers to the fish. We need fish ladders on 3,000 dams in California. People know about 2030 dams, but those 6-foot dams that are part of our flood control, those stop the same salmon from swimming upstream.
Right.
That stops fertilizer, minerals, things that are beneficial to the entire environment from coming upstream. They come upstream and they are life in our area. They populate the meadows and the streams with nutrients that are good for every type of vegetation. And we've cut them off. That's 3,000 dams in the state of California that we don't allow salmon to go up and propagate. And here's the crazy idea for you. No one in Congress shall be allowed Viagra until the fish ladders are built and all those fish can have sex all they want. It's only fair, right?
Yeah, why not? Yeah. It seems reasonable. There's a problem we've got all across the country, too, about things like that. When we sort of intervene to try and control the environment around us, but that breaks the natural cycles that are already there that would have maintained it. So then you end up with all kinds of other problems. Oh, now the rain is just washing all the soil away. I guess we shouldn't have cut those trees down. Or, issues with tons of wildlife. We've removed tons of predators from different areas. So then you have massive explosions of like rodent populations that destroy all, certain plants that you kind of needed. And it just breaks the whole cycle down. Sometimes it is just as simple as saying, hey, you know what? Maybe there's a better way to manage the floods. Maybe there's a better way to generate electricity that doesn't destroy the natural environment and, decrease the habitability of the regions here. I think that's a good one to think about for California as a whole. Large parts of Southern California, and we're dependent upon water that we pipe in from you guys farther north there. We have done so much with concrete that even when it rains, it just washes right out to sea and none of that goes into the ground. And we were already parched to begin with. Our aquifers are just gone because we have destroyed the ability of the rain we get to actually reach the soil.
Which counties and municipalities in Southern California have stepped up to the bioswale?
To the which?
A bioswale. People are going to start looking this up and Googling it. Number of municipalities in the Bay Area have adopted this scientific proposal from UC Davis and Berkeley, where the paved areas like parking lots and things like that, if we capture the rain runoff instead of putting it into storm drains and rushing it out through streams and flood control canals, if we let it go into these garden areas and let it percolate down, and then they're a little bit lower than the parking lot itself, and you can plant trees in there, and they have dry grasses that don't take any watering. So there's zero water for your landscaping. And when it rains in spurts and in the wintertime, the water goes into these bioswales and percolates into the ground and regenerates our aquifer. It's fantastic, and
I've not
beautiful.
Seen that anywhere in Southern California yet, and I will look for that and hope that we can get people talking more about that.
Oh, it's fantastic. A number of municipalities, it's required for all new construction on parking lots and the large construction and stuff. I mean, pretty much your residential homes, most of the water is kept on the lot. Some people are running it out to the curb, running it out to the gutter, and running it down the storm drain. But we're realizing that that's not the best for the environment. And you hit the nail on the head a bit ago. And the other key thing about is running that water around is that's our largest consumer of electricity in California is moving water. So if we actually had water locally and didn't have to move so much, we would save a tremendous amount of electricity.
Absolutely.
So when we move water around, 10% of our water goes to the people and 90% of our water goes to the farms. But the one measure that they don't talk about is 40% of California water goes to farm runoff. So when people use water, it goes to the sanitation facility and it's processed and cleaned before it either goes off to irrigation to be used again in some municipalities, or it's dumped into the stream and flows out to the ocean or the next municipality downstream. But the farm runoff doesn't go to the treatment plant. And that's 40% of California water. 40% of our water goes to runoff, because as much as people love to talk about all these fancy regenerative farming methods, we're not there yet. We don't use it. It's a pipe dream. Today, we use flood irrigation. That's how we water our crops. And with flood irrigation, 40% of all California water goes to waste. It just flows off the farm and dumped into the stream, and it's not treated. So if we captured 40% of California's water and stored it in reservoirs and water treatments, if we treat it and we want to reuse it, hey, guess what? There's a huge consumer right there that wants to use it. And you don't have to pump it across down the entire state, because guess what? The consumer's right next door. You only have to pump it a little bit. And guess what? Maybe you don't have to pump any of it. If you plug a few wells at the bottom of these reservoirs and let it percolate down into the aquifer, then they could just pull it up where they're at already. It's a little more expensive. You might be better off to just run it with gravity feed to come back to your farm. But those are the things that we aren't doing. And that's the scale that we need to do. I mean, could everybody cut back? Gavin Newsom, could everybody just cut back 15% of their 15% of 10%? Hey, wait a minute. How about 40% of 100%?
Exactly.
The whole thing.
Let's talk about the bigger users of it. Yeah, instead they penalized tons of individual consumers that were already trying to save water, and we let the Central Valley just pour tons of it out. Which again gets back to, I think, the essence of this, really. There's a key point we need to raise here.
Recording stopped. Recording in progress.
You cut out for a second. You're muted.
Are you muted?
No, I'm not.
Okay.
Can you hear me now?
We're back. I don't know where we went.
Yeah, it looks like the Zoom just cut out for a moment. It's the internet. We can always edit it out.
So we're talking about water.
Yeah, well, what I want to do is sort of bring this back around to a core point that's central to this whole independent Democrats idea. What we have here is a government in Sacramento that's run by Democrats, but they're going to allow these massive wasters to get away with things because they donate tons of money, and they're going to penalize tons of ordinary people in my district or yours because we don't donate tons and tons of money. So to get that independent Democrats endorsement, what we're asking is that you take a pledge to never capitulate to establishment Democrats or those corporate Democrats who are taking all that money, and also not to the crooked Republicans. So it comes back around to that whole drain the swamp idea, that nice pithy drain the swamp sounds so much easier and more relatable than end Citizens United, which is so much more abstract. Let's think about getting rid of that corruption. Let's actually drain that swamp. So could you take that pledge to never capitulate to establishment or corporate Dems or to crooked Republicans?
I can. I do. I mean, I'm with you. That makes complete sense. I do not understand how progressives go to Washington, D.C. and get converted. So I also pledge to let everybody know. If I get to Washington, D.C., I'll let you know. And AOC, she started to talk a lot about it. There's just lobbyists everywhere, and they're serving lunch every day. And then she kind of went quiet on it. And I'm thinking that we need to bring that out. I think that those conversations and those asks and requests and those bills that the lobbyists write and shove in our representatives' faces, I think that should be on an FEC website. Exactly what you're asking for, exactly the favors you're requesting of our representatives should be public information.
Right.
And that is going to be the answer to our question. That is the swamp.
And that gets back to really a key point that's come through. And a number of your answers here is this question of accountability, which really is a good bipartisan issue. We all want our representatives to represent us and our interests and to be held accountable once they go. And oh, he's in Washington now, he's an insider, he's now listening to K Street, and we just assume that we've lost control of them. I think what we want is a way to maintain control over our representatives, and a pledge like this can really help, because we'll know, David, we send you to Washington, you have pledged not to take this money, and if you do, we're going to come after you on it.
Yep. And well, once you get to Washington, D.C., there's still the negotiation. So you go in with, these are my policy objectives, this is what I want to do. And the question is how far are you going to go with it? Are you going to complete the legislative process, or are you just going to go halfway and then step back and just serve up platitudes? Oh, I can't get that done. And then, I mean, they tell you all the time, all the legislation happens in the first 100 days of a new Congress coming in. And it does. And then after that, they just sit back on their laurels and pretend to be working. They don't do another thing for 18 months.
And focus on their next re-election, as opposed to actually being out there knocking doors, forcing other representatives to sit down and take a meeting with you, respond.
Well, you only have so much leverage there. It's a dear colleague letter, and you want to be courteous to your colleagues, and that's important. And you work with them. But you have to send the letter. You have to make the ask. And then you have to share the results. These are the representatives I talked into my legislation. These are the representatives that I couldn't talk into my legislation. What do you think about that? And throw it back to the people that put them in office. Hey, did your representative promise this legislation as well? What are you going to do about it? Send them a letter, ask them if they'll do it. Give it one more consideration, because that's the thing is it's just one more constituent, until all of a sudden the incumbent realizes, they're growing in momentum. Everybody's jumping on the bandwagon. They really want this. And if I don't do it, they're going to vote against me next time. Mm-hmm. If we aren't willing to vote against our incumbents, we're going to get screwed forever.
And if we're not willing to put pressure on our representatives and hold them accountable, we're going to be stuck with them forever. So anything that pushes us in that direction.
We got to be careful there. We don't need to put pressure. There's standard basic steps. We can be really polite when we ask. We can cry and we can share stories and go through the procedures, but we really can't put physical pressure on them. We can't revolt. We can't fight. And I hate it when Democrats say, I'm going to fight. The last thing that any representative ever did for anybody is put on boxing gloves or, UFC fighting or anything. They don't fight. It's legislation. You write things down in a little piece of paper, suggestions, and you throw it in a suggestion box, and you invite other people to join you in that. That's it. It's a suggestion box. That's what you do. You control access to the suggestion box. And then after that, the speaker controls which one of those suggestions get voted on, unless the constituents get enough co-sponsors that the speaker doesn't have to worry about it anymore.
Right.
Enough people want it. Enough people have petitioned their representatives to get them to co-sponsor. And the speaker doesn't have to worry their pretty little head about it anymore.
And that's what I kind of mean by...
goes to the floor and gets a vote.
Right.
That's been the standard process for 200 years. And anybody that wants to change it is making a mistake. Whether they're trying to do an assault on the Capitol on January 6th, whether they're calling their organization a revolution, it's telling the truth, and that's a revolution in itself, and it's a political revolution, but we need to step back from the violence terms, the pressure terms.
Gotcha.
It's a simple little process that's just all about gathering consensus and voting. And we don't realize that the majority of constituents, even the people that vote, do not petition their representative. They don't. You've been voting for 50 years. How many times did you get an official letter back from your representative that said, yes, I will co-sponsor that bill, or no, I won't co-sponsor that bill? How many people have that letter? 1, 2% of all Americans have a letter like that? Well, what do you expect? If you send your children to Washington, D.C. for a high school field trip and you don't give them specific guidelines and instructions on what you want them to do and not do, they're going to turn into hooligans and they're going to get into trouble and stuff like that. Exactly the same thing happens when you send your representative. They work for you. You must give them guidance. You must tell them precisely what you want them to do. Do you want them to vote for a legislation, or do you want them to champion a legislation? A champion is somebody who not just votes for it, but they sponsor it and they invite other representatives to co-sponsor it with them. That's a champion. It's a level up.
Popular,
and
yes.
that's the piece that constituents don't ask of their representatives is how much of the legislative process are you going to complete? You're not going to fight. You're not going to put on boxing gloves. You're not going to punch somebody. That's not part of the process. The process is a suggestion box and inviting other people to join you in that suggestion. It's simple, it's peaceful, it's a bunch of paperwork, and we got to do it. We got to learn how to do it right. And we do. I've got examples of when we've elevated issues to election issues for specific representatives, and they flipped.
Yep.
When the constituents come around and say, hey, this is election season and this issue, this legislative idea is something that we really want, we need you to change your position on it. They do. They flip. It's not that hard. It's easier than a march. It's easier than it's easier than a march. It takes less people, it takes less hours, it takes less organization, it takes less investment.
And not only does it give us a way to hold the representatives accountable for what they're doing, but it also takes some of that control away from the speaker and the whip to dictate what's actually going to happen. Because if it all just goes into the box and we let them steer that process, then it takes
say control. You say
power
control,
away
but it
from us.
doesn't take. It's not just control. It takes the burden away from them.
And
they are
don't wanna do
tremendously burdened with satisfying the needs of constituents and satisfying the needs of those briber donors. And they just have to negotiate the two in their mind, and it's platitudes here and it's platitudes there and it's money here and it's votes there. And that's a balancing act. If you take that burden away from them, they don't have to worry about it. There's nothing they can do. They can go golfing.
Right. That's what I'm basically saying.
It's not their fault.
They can say, well, the speaker's doing this, the whip's doing this, I'm not really responsible for it, but what we really need, and this is where those metaphors like, fighters come in, is what we need is somebody who's actually going to send those letters, carry that process through, and not just sit back and let somebody else control that. Actually, as you say, complete the process, which would be a nice change from our do-nothing Congresses.
Oh, I've participated in a local municipality where they had, in the Bay Area, they had big protests a year after the police just blew away, just decimated a gentleman having a mental health crisis. And, inexperience, no training, not professionals. Somebody forgot to stop by the office and pick up the taser. And, the protests come to town, and it's, nice big suburbia, and everybody's surprised at the big protests. And all those protesters that show up, nobody went to the city council meetings. They drop the ball. They scream, they cry, they complain, but they don't show up at the city council meetings. And trust me, those things are a nightmare. They're way harder than petitioning your Congress member. They got this thing called the Brown Act. And if you go to a city council meeting and you make suggestion and improvement and, hey, why don't we, send out some professional people to deal with mental health crisis, maybe a social worker, a nurse or something like that. the exact same people who've been studying for 8 years to learn how to handle people in a mental health crisis, that the police take them to after they apprehend them and engage them. They drag them to these professionals who don't have guns to shoot them. They don't have handcuffs, and they are experienced at dealing with people in mental health crisis. All you need to do is get them out there on the job. And I've seen it happen in San Francisco. 40 police officers, guns drawn, pointed at this homeless guy. And along comes the social worker. She walks up through all the guns and sits down next to the guy and chats for a while. And eventually the guns get put away and the 40 police officers leave. 2 police officers stay, and they drive everybody off to the local hospital where folks go after a mental health crisis. Anyway, we have to recognize that it's not the police that you need to fight with. You don't need the confrontation. The policy is set at your city council. You have to go to these city council meetings, sit through the boring meeting. At the very end, you get 2 minutes to speak, and you have to have 6 or 7 people show up and share the story and the better ideas. Mm-hmm. Like, why not have 911 offer up to people who call? Hey, would you like the nonviolent social workers to respond to this call? And guess what? People do. Grandpa has stolen grandma's false teeth again. And she's all in a dither because she's got to get off to the beauty parlor to get her hair done because it hasn't been done in all of COVID. And grandpa's chuckling like crazy and grandma's all in a flurry and she's, calling the police on him. We don't need 6 guns showing up. You need 1 social worker showing up to work it out and to get grandpa to understand how much that upsets grandma and to, stop teasing her so much and, laugh a little bit with him and give her her teeth and let her go to her beauty parlor appointment. Since this is the 6th time it's happened. And where did I get this story? The police officers, because they have to go all 6 times to deal with the situation. Right. And they're good. There's some police officers that do have significant amounts of conflict resolution training, and a lot of it's on the job and they're working with people. But for the tough cases and for the inexperienced rookies to go out with guns blazing at first, that's a mistake, and we're doing it wrong. And this municipality that I was at, it took 60 people, 6 people every meeting for months and months and months to keep asking the same thing, to finally get the city council members that are absolutely clueless. They've never seen a police officer. They've never been pulled over one by one. They've never gotten a traffic ticket. They drive by the police station and, they wave and they see them. They have no idea what goes on a police call. They've never been on a police call. They don't deal with the violence at bars. They don't deal with the domestic violence. They have no clue. And you've got to bring that to the city council members, mm-hmm. because they are used car salesmen and real estate developers. They're not social workers. They don't deal with mental health crises. They're not professionals. They don't know. They know how to run elections. They know how to get people to like them. They're popular. They've got pretty faces. And that's how they got to be on the city council. They don't know anything about dealing with a mental health crisis. So they don't know how to create policy to send experts out to deal with a mental health crisis. And they don't have the training. They don't have the education. They don't have the experience. And then, the nurses, they'll tell you, yeah, I deal with these 300-pound guys, going through their mental health crisis all the time. We manage it and a few things get broken, but, this is what we do. These are the methods and things that we do to manage the situation, and we don't use guns. So it's amazing work that they do, and it's been a long time coming, and there's really no excuse for them not being mobile. And they are mobile places. I think Stockton's doing it, and I think Contra Costa County, all the city municipalities are trying to push it to the county because, we don't want to pay for it. We don't want to bother with it. It's like, hey, This problem exists in every town, every community. Just, however you share 911. 911 sends the ambulance, 911 sends the fire department, 911 sends the police. Why not send out the non-violent social workers to deal with the mental health crisis?
Right.
It's not that big of a deal. And, obviously, they never know what they're walking into. It could be something that the police need to get involved in. And, they go as a team and they order police as a backup and don't put themselves into a dangerous situation, which is what they already do every day today. Because again, that's exactly where the police officers take people in a mental health crisis, is to these professionals that deal with them all the time. Mm-hmm. So it's amazing how a charming young social worker can disarm someone who's going through a crisis easier and faster than 40 police officers. You have to see it. You need the video. You need to be there to watch it happen. It's amazing. It's hard to do. It's a profession. They are experts.
And I think what we need is, some charming people to wander into this Washington swamp and try and get this process working again, instead of the same kind of tribalistic BS year after year where everyone just blows it off and I can't do it. But instead, let's walk in and actually talk about the process and what we can do to make things better.
You raise an interesting point that I'm curious about. The gap between the authority and responsibility in Congress versus your local municipality, your counties, your sheriffs, your cities, your police chief. And I think Cori Bush is on the front lines of that. I mean, she came up through, the Ferguson demonstrations and marches and complaints about, hey, you guys are doing this all wrong. And then she went to Congress. And now she's up there in Congress and she can talk about it from on high in the same perspective, but there's no legislation that she passes that directly affects what the city council does. So there's a gap there, and I don't know how that gets filled. I don't know how that gets bridged. Cori's way closer to it than we are. I think, obviously she has the experience and know-how to what she wants to get done. But I don't know about, the influences. I know during the Obama administration, there was a period where I think Attorney General Holder was trying to make some sort of outreach and guidance and that type of thing, but I don't think it really went anywhere. I think there's a gap.
I think you hit a really good point to sort of leave people on, especially as we're thinking about supporting candidates running and building more of this accountability among our representatives, is that so much of what affects us is actually local governance. It's your city council, it's your county supervisors, it's your sheriff. And many of these races now, because there is so much power there, even in seats that don't even pay anything, they're just volunteer part-time positions that someone has to run for, but they're dumping $60,000, $100,000 into running a corporate-friendly candidate so that they can support whatever particular special interest and not us. And I think that more people sort of stepping up and realizing the amount of power that we have to get involved, and not just with our votes, but with a few dollars here or there, or going to a city council meeting, or running for your city council. How many positions in your county are running unopposed? Every election across this country, there are tons of offices where the incumbent runs completely unopposed, and we have no idea just how dirty some of that stuff is. So I think I can leave our viewers here with a call to actually step up and support these kind of candidates, go to these meetings, get involved, because
that's what I was going to say.
That's the ethos here for our independent Democrats, and for really a progressive movement as a whole, is to restore that people power that we have been turning over to corporations. Drop some of the distractions and let's wade into the process. So again, it's been a real pleasure to speak with you, David.
I love that presentation. I really want to reiterate, there's the organization that says, just run for something, right? Mm-hmm. And it's a great idea. It's very motivational. Mm-hmm. And for those who have considered it and think, okay, but that's a lot to run for something, and that's too much for me, please, please, please volunteer. Find a candidate and volunteer. Every single small candidate has way too few volunteers. The momentum and the energy and the big crowds get sucked up into the major operations. And for president, and hey, guess what?
Right.
There's a candidate running for Congress in your neighborhood that needs your help. Please volunteer.
And a county supervisor candidate, and a city council candidate. All of these things are complicated processes, and the more people willing to contribute a little bit of time, and even if it's simple things like writing postcards or sending in letters, attending a meeting, there's always something. We all have a great deal more that we can do, and the ability to get this change really, it ultimately comes from us. So, David, it's been a pleasure to speak with you. Again, I'm Liam O'Mara, and this is for Independent Democrats. And thank you very much for watching.
Thank you so much for having me. Pleasure.